Welcome to the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 153 with Stevie Anna. Stevie talks about her 3-month horseback adventure with her dog and 2 horses through Patagonia. Just a note here on the audio, it's a little shaky during the first 5 minutes, but at the 5-minute point, it gets much better. If you want to get in touch or leave some feedback about the show, you can reach me at paul@thepursuitzone.com, or you can leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. Raised in Oregon and Texas, Stevie Anna lives for travel and adventure. While living in a van with her dog Darcy, she traveled to 49 states, and she's guided backcountry horse trips both in Alaska and Minnesota. She also works as an expedition project manager. In 2015, she moved to Argentina and began planning Patagonia, an adventure on horseback through Patagonia from the dry steppe to the high mountain passes. It was an exploration over 3 months and nearly 1,200 miles of the stunning wilderness of Patagonia, and it was a way to travel slow and reconnect with the wild elements often missed. You can learn more about Stevie and the Patagonia adventure at her website, stevieanna.com. Stevie Anna, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Why did you, and I guess how did you end up moving to Argentina?
Sure. So I spent a lot of time traveling out of my van in the United States, kind of looking for that place to call home, or at least a good base camp. And I had been living in Alaska off and on for about 8 years, which is, in my mind, kind of the Patagonia of the North. And so I wanted to know more about what lied in the South and everything I had heard and read about Argentina. Just the horse culture and the wilderness, just the open spaces and again, the culture. I was always drawn to it. And so I eventually traveled down here, my first trip, which was in 2014. And that kind of feeling of home that I was searching for just hit me like never before. And I moved 3 months later after I had my first initial trip down here. I flew back to the States basically just long enough to pack up my bags, grab my dog, sell the van, and move back here. And I haven't left since.
Where do you live down there?
So I'm currently based in Bariloche. It's one of the largest cities in Patagonia. I'm just right outside of the city here.
So you moved down in 2015, is that correct?
Yep. Actually, it's exactly 3 years ago, at the beginning of March, I moved down here.
How does that work in terms of, are you able to live there full time? And how does that work with the visa situation?
Yeah, so the visa for anyone from the United States, at least, is a 90-day visa. And I started out doing that. And then I got lucky enough to find work down here. So I'm on my 3rd year of temporary residency, and then this year I'll be able to apply and get my permanent residency. I don't have to worry about it, which is really nice.
And when did you begin learning Spanish?
Unfortunately, after I moved here, this is terrible. I arrived here with literally probably 5 words in my pocket, Spanish, and I've been learning ever since. I'm a slow learner, but now, especially after the trip, I got a much better handle on the language.
Tell me about your dog, Darcy.
Yeah, Darcy is my best travel companion. She's been there with me for the last 5 years. I got her as a puppy in Alaska at 6 weeks old, and she's been traveling with me, like I said, in my van all over the states. She's done 26 states, and Argentina will now be her 3rd country. So she's quite the traveler herself.
Now, how did you get this idea for Patagonia?
It started after I moved down here. I'd always been, very involved in the horse world. I started riding at the age of 4. And in Texas, it was mostly barrel racing, rodeo, and just for fun. But after I moved down to Argentina, I was really interested in the estancia or the ranch life and the work and the rhythm and the culture of all of that. So I started guiding here with a local gaucha. And after having seen, how you can travel by horse in the backcountry and the access that allows you, and just the difference, than traveling by car or even by bike, what have you. It just really opened my eyes to this horse travel world and wanting to know more of my new country, especially its backcountry. I started forming the idea to do a traverse across Patagonia.
So tell me more about this gaucha that you met.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carol Jones, her and her family, her grandfather was from Texas. And their family had the first estancia or ranch here in Bariloche. And after I met her, she kind of took me under her wing to teach me everything she could about horse travel in these parts. And so I started packing with her, doing horseback trips out of Bariloche here. And after that, the idea really started taking shape. She just really inspired me to do something on a much bigger scale. And wanting to know more of the backcountry of Patagonia, it all kind of took shape over this last couple years and was able to make that happen with her help.
How did the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid part play into this?
Sure. So Carol's grandfather, he came down from Texas by ship to Buenos Aires. And from Buenos Aires, Argentina, he rode his horse down to Bariloche, where he would eventually settle the first ranch in Bariloche, the 1,000+ miles south of Buenos Aires in Patagonia. And Butch Cassidy and Sundance with Etta Place, a few years later, had done the same trip and crossed paths, of course, with the other Texans in these parts. So they were friends for some time until her grandfather had found out that they were stealing cattle, not from him, but from other people. And then he kind of took a little bit of space back just because he owned the first general store of the area and I think he didn't want to get robbed himself. But Butch Cassidy and Sundance, they were mostly based out of Cholila, which is about a 4 or 5 hour drive south of Bariloche. But yeah, they had been friends for some time there.
Yeah, that's neat how you got tied into that little piece of history. I mean, I've heard of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid before, but I guess I never really placed them in that area.
Yeah, most people don't even know that. They just think of Robert Redford and Newman. Most of them just think it's a movie, but it's actually pretty cool to think about the fact that, yeah, the history, it brings them all the way south. Actually, further south than where I rode in Patagonia. They were robbing banks down in Rio Gallegos, which is much further south than where I rode. So they're known through all of Argentina and Patagonia.
So what did you need to learn? What did you need to teach yourself, and what kind of skills before you set off on this big adventure?
It was a little bit of everything. My biggest concern was for the animals. So I was really, really hyper focusing on how to keep them healthy, safe, and how to travel at a pace that wouldn't wear on them over a long period of time. I wanted them to arrive to the finish better than when we started. And I have a very expedition kind of mindset. So where a lot of other people do these kind of trips and they go switching horses or buying horses when one gets hurt or tired or what have you. If one of my horses were to get injured or sick, it would end the trip. My main focus was that we leave as a team and we arrive as a team. So I really, really focused on everything for my animals and my dog. Everything from how they would eat to being tied up at night so they don't get, cut by their ropes or loose, to anything from dangers of pumas, wild horses that they could potentially run off with, water scarcity, grazing, and then really good equipment that wouldn't break their backs or rub on them. And then with my dog, mostly just emergency care and making sure she didn't get again, kicked by a horse or run off, or so lots of training on commands and communication, things like that. And then everything else for first aid for myself, and then emergency care again for the horses as well. I was taking veterinarian classes and just really working on making sure everything was just trying to learn as much as I could in preparation for everything, anything that could potentially happen.
How did you go about finding your horses, which you have the names Sundance and Bandito?
That was probably the biggest challenge of the entire preparation process, was trying to find good horses. It took me 3 months of nonstop solid searching for horses down here. If you have time, yeah, it's great to break in your own horses, but that takes years. And I wanted horses that were already, accustomed to being on the trail, that were already tame and could handle the trip. So yeah, it was tricky. It was just a lot of looking around and spending time with the animals before I bought them, and just trying to put them through a little bit of, road riding and testing them out before I got them. And I have to say, part of it does come down to luck. I got really lucky because my horses were just amazing animals. They're just, I can't say enough good things about the horses that I got. They're great.
Oh, what are their personalities like?
Well, Bandido, he's the big black horse. He's a little hard-headed. He's super, super tame, a little slow, but quite the character. He's not afraid of anything, and just a super tough horse, and just hard-headed, but super friendly. He talks to you every morning. Every time I unzip the tent, he starts talking to you. He's great. And then Sundance, he's probably 22 years old, which is quite old for a horse, but tough. He's just as tough as they come. And I use mostly for riding, because he would go anywhere, do anything for me. He felt kind of like my grandpa or something. I just always felt very protected around him. He was just amazing, great horse. And like I said, there's just a huge trust between us. So I used him a lot for my lead horse, because I knew that I could get him to do whatever I needed to cross a river, whatever, and Bandito would follow us.
Did you ride both of the horses, or what was your kind of strategy around using one as a pack horse and then riding the other one?
Bandito was a little bit younger and stronger. He was a little bit heavier, like fatter. So I used him primarily as my pack horse to carry a majority of the load. But there were some times that I would switch and I would ride Bandito. It just depended on how much I was carrying and what kind of situation I was in, either riding mountains or city. Well, not city. I guess I should say town. I think the biggest town I crossed was had 1,000 people. So, but yeah, it just totally depends. But majority of the time I rode Sundance.
I know pretty much nothing about horses, horse terminology, horse tack, or anything. But when I was looking through your blog, I found it a little bit interesting. You were writing about saddles. And so you had some choices amongst the type of saddle that you would pick. Can you explain why you chose the saddle that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Orthoflex saddle was created by a woman and her husband who had done these long rides, and they developed the saddle specifically for long rides. Most people use horses, if on a daily basis, maybe an hour at a time, but never riding 8 to 10 hours every single day for 3 months or however long. So these saddles were specifically designed to carry weight well and were just super solid for the long rides. Like I said, other ranchers or gauchos here, they've got, 40 horses to pick from, and they might ride a different horse every single day. So where any decent saddle, you can typically use, because you're switching a horse out every single day to ride. In this case, you have to get it right, because as soon as you break your horse's back, as soon as they start getting swollen, it's your trip is over.
I've heard of the word gaucho before, and when I think of gaucho, I just think, oh, that's just cowboys from the southern hemisphere. Can you maybe give us a little more nuanced definition of what a gaucho is?
I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but in Brazil, they say that gaucho comes from the word guacho. I could be pronouncing that totally wrong because it's in Portuguese, which means orphan, or for an animal that has lost its family. And they use that word then gaucho because gauchos are often alone. They usually work alone and live alone up in the mountains taking care of animals. So the gauchos down here, they often do work alone, and they're very kind of lone wolf up in the mountains watching sheep or cows or what have you. There's this huge culture here, though. It's very traditional, and they still are very, very proud of the tradition of the gaucho and their customs, drinking mate down to the outfits that they wear, the equipment that they use is a lot of times, several hundred years old. So they're very traditional, very mellow, strong, but quiet, solo kind of cowboy of the South.
What is mate?
Mate is actually, I say mate because most of the people from the States, we just say mate. But down here, we call it yerba mate. The yerba is the name for the tea. And it's a type of, it's not green tea, but it's a type of tea that is similar to a green tea. And the mate is actually the gourd that it's drunk out of. And they drink it with a metal straw that has a filter on the end that filters out the tea leaves. But it's a communal drink, so it's mostly drunk with other people. There's a cebador, which is the server, and he's the one that pours the mate in the gourd and serves all of the people. And so you're usually around in a circle talking, and he will serve you the mate. You will drink the mate until it's totally finished. You hand it back to him. He fills it up again, and then he passes it on to the next person. And everybody shares the same mate with the same straw. So it's quite comical to see if you've never seen it before. Most people think it's some kind of weird drug or something, and it's just tea. But really, it's an excuse. It's a custom here to slow down. I think everything in Patagonia is in Argentina, if you will, is really about slowing down and enjoying the moment and people. And it's just a good excuse to stop what you're doing, sit down, share a mate with your friend or friends, and chat. There's always time to do that here.
So once you got started on your adventure, how did you go about planning the route, or did you have a plan? And then how did you navigate?
It was funny because I feel like all of my planning for the route that I had done before I left was not totally useless, but more or less useless, because your route really is depicted by water, grass, and fences. And that maps this day and age, just because of the change in climate here. It really doesn't depict, where you can find water, grass, and where the fences, where people have fenced off ranches, lie. So you really have to kind of go up through the mountains where you can find good grazing, water, and then go asking the gauchos where you can pass through the fences, or where there's a trail or something, pass through the mountains. So everything is really depicted by the people that you meet and the landscape. The equipment that I use, though, I should say, I got maps from the military out of Buenos Aires. They're old maps, but they're great because they have puestos, which is what they call the little houses where the gauchos stay at across the ranches. They're little shacks, and most of them are abandoned, but they actually have marked on these old military maps the different puestos. So I knew that, there would be at least a shelter there, even if it was totally abandoned without a roof or whatever. So I would use those a lot, also with the topo, and then my GPS, which I had a Garmin InReach to communicate. I could send text messages to my family from that, which is great, and to use it to navigate as well. My family could actually follow me during my ride, which was excellent. So they didn't have to worry, because I went several weeks without having any kind of internet connection or cell phone signal, of course, in the backcountry. But those were my two main methods. The main majority of the time, though, was just going and asking the local gauchos how to get through a different area.
How do you go about feeding your horses? Are they able to just eat, like graze on the grass, or do you have to stop in ranches and get feed? How does that work?
Absolutely. So that was the biggest thing. And that's why it took 3 months, is just keeping my horses healthy. It's always better if horses can graze naturally. And so I really made sure that I stayed close to the mountains and that they could have plenty of time to eat. So I would wake up at 3:30. I would travel from early morning until noon, and I would stop at noon, and they'd have all day and all night to eat every single day. So my horses, I didn't have to actually haul food. They were able to graze the entire time. When I got to Santa Cruz, the last province in the south, it was quite dry. So there were some times at like the last 2 weeks that I actually did end up buying a little bit, or not buying, the gauchos gave me some alfalfa for my horses. But that was only a few times. But my horses, they arrived at the end of the trail just as fat as when we left, just making sure that they had plenty of time to graze and relax.
And how about you? What are you doing for your food?
Sure. So I took a whole bunch of freeze-dried backpackers pantry food. Then on top of that, just dried salamis, cheeses. I would take meat, and you just hang it up in the tree at night. It forms a dry crust on the outside and actually keeps for quite some time. Then just cook on the trail. And when I would cross estancias or puestos with gauchos, they would often cook for me, which was really nice. There was plenty of lamb. I think I ate, 50 lamb dinners during the ride. So everyone was a little surprised when I showed up at the end of my ride a little fatter than when I left.
Are you able to start campfires every night while you're at camp?
Yeah, I'm able to do that whenever, but many times I hit the sack so early I didn't bother with a fire. I took my little stove, and in the south it's really dry and they have lots of wildfires, so I'm extra cautious with that. In the drier climates, I wouldn't do any kind of fire there. I would just use my little camp stove. But there were many nights, that we did fires, and I say we, me and my animals, that I made a fire and would cook the meat over the fire for sure.
Now, you did this in the summertime?
Yes, I did it mostly in the spring and then early summer, because if you get to Santa Cruz, which is in the south, too late, all of the rivers and everything are completely dried up and there's no water at all.
What kind of temperatures did you have like throughout the day? What were the temperature swings?
It really varied. When I was crossing the mesas, they're really tall, and the wind, it really, it's just crazy up there. To have like 75 mile an hour winds pretty easily, which would just put a pretty big halt on the ride. I'd just have to camp and find some coverage and stay put. But there were many times that it snowed on top of the mesas, and then down south, it would also get very windy, but it was all open without any kind of trees. It was all pampa and was very, very hot. So that also helped, again, traveling, 4 a.m. until noon, because the heat there, it was just brutal, and there's no shade and really dry.
So what do you see out there for wildlife?
You have a little bit of everything. Lots of guanaco, which are kind of like llamas, but larger. They're everywhere. Then we have choique, which is kind of the ostrich of the south. There's lots of armadillo, some puma. I only saw one puma on the whole trip, but they're everywhere. They're just hiding. Lots of wild horses, tons of sheep, as you can imagine. Lots of condors, different types of eagles, birds, and owls, and lots of fox. There's red fox and gray fox. And the gray fox, they would come in little packs and they would follow us. They were really, really curious, but they would follow us for hours sometimes. Just super cute, tiny little foxes. But yeah, I think that's about it.
You mentioned the wind being very challenging for you, but what else did you find kind of to be the most challenging part of the adventure for you?
The most challenging part of the adventure, I think, during the ride, I would have to say, was knowing that it would end and just trying to, slow down and appreciate the moment and not think about the end. I had a pretty hard time not wanting to end the trip. Someone told me once that it's much easier to start a journey than it is to end it. And I completely agree. And now I'm being faced, I think, with the biggest challenge of the entire trip is coming back to normal life, and trying to readjust after the ride has been really, really difficult, but all in time.
So what was it? I mean, what was it about the trip that you did not want to end?
That I'm still trying to figure out. It's really hard to explain. On one side, it's just the toughest thing you've ever done. And then on the other side, it's a kind of hard that you just get used to. You have the same routine every single day. You wake up, you saddle, you ride, you put up camp, and go to bed. And it's just this simple, I don't know how to explain it. It's just this simplicity of doing something difficult like that. It's hard work, but it gives so much back to you. And then again, you have all this time to meet and sit down and talk with people that you didn't know before. And this whole world opens up, and you never know how your day is going to end. You never know where you're going to sleep or who might feed you or what might happen. And it's just another pace, another life, another kind of mindset altogether. So coming back from that it's been tough.
The gauchos that you met along the way, what did they have to say to you, or what kind of comments did they make to you about your adventure?
They were really, really supportive and excited about my trip. Everyone always asks me the best part of the ride. And I have to say, hands down, is the people that I met, because I've never experienced just a continuous, generosity from people everywhere I went. There was not one bad experience. Everyone was just so kind and open, and they just want to help you and support you. And I think especially with the gauchos, they really appreciate someone else who is traveling or knowing the countryside by horse. So there's this kind of common factor that we always have this base to kind of connect on. And they were just the kindest, again, just most generous people. They would absolutely do anything for you. And they did. They really just made the trip. The people just absolutely made the trip.
What about the adventure are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the fact that me and my animals arrived to the finish line the way that we left. That everyone was in really good health and really good spirits. And we arrived as a team. That to me was the most important and most, in my mind, valued.
Are there any moments of the trip that stand out for you in your memory? Any a particular moment in time that you could talk about as a good memory?
Oh, that's so tough. There's so many good memories. One of the toughest days I had was coming down off of this mesa. It was a 3-day mesa crossing, and my horses fell into this super heavy, it's almost like a quicksand, but it's more of a clay type of mud. and they almost couldn't leave, or they almost couldn't get out. I had to take off the pack saddle, the saddles, and leave them completely untied so that they could get out of the mud themselves. And this all happened on the side of the mountain. It was really dangerous. And the worst thing that happened on the entire ride was the only moment that was actually kind of dangerous. And coming off of that mesa, got hit by a huge storm and couldn't see anything. And I went to the first place that I could see. I could see in the distance there were some of these, which is weird. There were these big dome tents, which is really strange to find in Patagonia because everything is just ranches. There's nothing. Yeah. So I went straight for these big dome tents, and I found out that it was all friends of mine from Bariloche who were working in the national park there, who had just a ton of food, and then to arrive with, you know, familiar faces and smiles and open arms was just crazy that it all happened on literally the worst day of the entire trip. But it's just, I don't know, it's things like that I think, yeah, you just, on these trips, you know, when you hit low, it's low, and then 5 minutes later, you have no idea what will come around the corner, and it just completely changes everything. You always forget about the hardships, you know, but that was probably one of my fondest memories.
So Stevie, I want to circle back to, you know, you mentioned having a job down there, because I'm kind of wondering what kind of a job that you have that allows you to take this amount of chunk of time off to do this type of an adventure. What are you doing down there for work?
Sure. So I work with Carol Jones doing the pack trips, and she, of course, was super happy that I was doing this ride and didn't mind me leaving for that amount of time. And then with my residency and everything, I'm actually teaching English at a local school here, which I absolutely love. But our summer months are from December through February. So they allowed me to take the month of November off, and were happy for me to do the ride as well. So a little bit of everything. Then I do a lot of expedition work, but that's all online, and it's winter up in the States. So I can always find, you know, a way, you know, to get around that stuff. But yeah, just a little bit of everything.
I'm curious about the Spanish teaching, the English teaching. Like what kind, who's in your class? What's the, you know, is it older students or is it children, or, you know, and what's the most challenging part of that?
So I work it's a secondary school. So it's more of the equivalent to a middle school in the States. And it's a small private school, but it's a mountain school. So we do a lot of our classes outside. There's a lot of rock climbing, hiking the mountains, lots of fun activities. I've got about 16 students. This is my third year, and they're just amazing. I've got an amazing group of students. Really, the whole school is just awesome. It's a very cool project. And I think the most challenging part of the work there is just getting attached to the students. I mean, we're kind of one big family. They were all part of my trip as well. They all followed my journey and kept up with me on my ride, and just a great support system, really.
Let me ask a follow-up to see if I understand this. So instead of having to like stand in a classroom in front of a group of students sitting at desks, you get to like go outside and go on adventures while you're teaching them English?
Yes, that's not every single day. There's lots of classroom time as well. But for example, on nice days, yeah, we'll be outside teaching, you know, out in the garden or hiking. We plan week trips, hiking in the mountains and camping. They just went last week, and they had the choice to either bivvy outside or sleep in tents, and all the students bivvied outside. So it's just, I don't know, it's a really, really cool project. But yeah, they try to involve teaching outside of the classroom as much as possible.
How long has it been since you've completed your trip?
I arrived to Chalten at the very end of January, so it's been about a month and a half.
Have you had time to process, for example, you know, have you thought about what your biggest takeaway is from the adventure?
It's really tough. A lot of people are asking me, when are you going to write a book? What are you going to, I want to hear all about the trip. And it's really tough because you imagine this ride, and before you leave, you imagine it kind of answering all these life questions. You imagine yourself arriving to the end with all of these answers. And instead it worked completely the opposite. Instead, I arrived to the end of the ride with all of these questions that you just don't have time in normal life to ask yourself. It takes 3 months of sitting on a horse by yourself to even know to ask yourself these questions. So I arrived to the end of the ride feeling like a completely different person, not understanding really the changes that had happened. And I still haven't been able to process that. So to me, as far as, trying to understand everything is going to take some time. I think the changes happen, but it takes years to figure out or to understand those changes. And I'm starting that process now, but it'll be a while. The one thing I do know that I learned from this ride and that I can take away from this ride, the gauchos and the people and the experience, is how important people are in life. And that really gave me a huge appreciation just for family, for friends, and just the everyday stranger, the passerby. Just really, really appreciate people and understand their importance.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the same thing. When's the book or the movie going to come out?
When I can figure it out, when I can figure out all of this stuff that happened on the trip, I've got, lots of drinking mate and looking back and thinking to do before a book forms.
Do you think that do you have a desire to create a book?
I really do. But I'm kind of a person that I don't ever do anything half-heartedly. So if I do something, I want to do it well. And to rush just to tell a story before it's been told is not my thing. So if it takes years to figure out, then it takes years to figure out. But if it happens sooner, great. I'm just not going to rush it. That's all. I want to, again, process everything and really figure out what the journey was about, because I think that's a story that's still being told at this point.
Where are the horses right now?
My horses are so much closer than before. I actually just got back the night before last from bringing them from El Chalten to Trevelin, which is 4 hours south of me. And then in a week or two, I will go get them from Trevelin and bring them here to Bariloche. So they're almost home. They're at a friend's ranch now, eating a bunch of green grass and hanging out until I can go and pick them up and bring them home. But they're en route.
I wanted to ask a bit about this freelance adventure work. I mean, how you mentioned that it's mostly online. How did you kind of get into that line of work, and what exactly is it?
For sure. That's a tricky question because it's kind of everything as far as expedition work goes. I started working for a few explorers up in Alaska, managing communications, sponsorship, social media, website, and all of the above. And that kind of followed into working in brand ambassador programs and for different company, providing content as far as writing, photography, and what have you. And then also teaching other people how they can do that as well.
Yeah, when we exchanged emails and I saw in your signature you had One World Endeavors, I thought, wait a second, I've seen that before. That's the Lonnie Dupree thing. And then I thought, I think you and I have actually crossed paths before here in Minneapolis at the Outdoor Adventure Expo, but we never met. You've been here before, right?
I have. Yeah. I'm a huge Midwest mountaineering fan. I've been in those parts I love Minneapolis. It's great. And then I go to the Outdoor Retailer every single year, which was in Salt Lake City, but this year I'll be there in Denver. So I'm sure we've crossed paths before.
What is that like, the outdoor retailer? Would that be like a good place to go and meet recruits for this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody from the outdoor industry to explorers, adventurers, and everything in between are there. It's just a great way to meet people, to exchange ideas and to collaborate and have a good time. The outdoor retailer is absolutely worth it though.
Is that once a year?
It's twice a year. They have the summer show in July and then the winter show in January.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but does it take an invitation to get into that show?
It doesn't. You can be invited. You can be brought on by an outdoor company or a buyer. But sorry, I think you can also be part of media, which might be in your case, working with podcasts. There's media that also gets in, or you can pay an entry. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it's all on their website.
Well, Stevie, I know that you just got back from your trip a month and a half ago, but what's kind of on the horizon for you?
Right now, I'm just going to focus on working here on the ranches and enjoying the tranquility of being on the estancia and working with animals and learning more about the ranching life here. I really fell in love with that during my ride, and I really want to learn more on holistic management and maybe do some work with sheep and my dog, ride horses, drink mate until the next adventure. But I've already got one kind of in mind. I'm just trying to enjoy a little bit of downtime before I get too far along.
How can people contact you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my website, stevieanna.com, and it's Stevie with Anna 2 N's.com. On there or on social media as well. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Stevie Anna.
All right, Stevie Anna, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling the story of your Patagonia adventure, horseback ride across Patagonia, and congratulations on starting it and completing it.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. If you want to support the show, here are a few simple ways. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to the podcast. You can like the show on Facebook or follow along on Twitter at The Pursuit Zone. And you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or Spotify. This episode was recorded on March 15, 2018. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.